Following wrestling can engender a rather love-hate relationship. For every incredible spectacle, there's an equally spectacular letdown. For every Hell in a Cell, there's a kennel from hell. And while numerous titles have done an excellent job of recreating the bombastic sports entertainment showcase, most notably with 2K Sports' recent showings, there are more than enough duds stinking up the roster. There's just something extra rubbish about a terrible wrestling game. Maybe it's because a game based on real athletes requires such intricate animations that any slight wonkiness makes it incredibly jarring. Or maybe it's because pitting a zombie gravedigger against a fairy tale monster who literally eats worms is already so ridiculous, any further game engine hiccups take it right into Looney Town. These games are top contenders for the tinfoil belt of terrible wrestling games.
So join us as I run down the worst of the lot with my friends from Cultaholic and Peter.
I'm Ben from TripleJump, and here are the 10 worst wrestling games of all time. Number 10. ECW Hardcore Revolution. Ah, ECW, the rough-looking, estranged uncle of the mainstream wrestling family who wore scuffed leathers, hung out at dive bars and probably had a side business selling questionable substances to equally questionable buyers. The lower-budget, more extreme alternative to WCW and WWF, ECW was the happily ever after for fans of brutal barbed wire matches and hardcore bouts. The 2000 release from Acclaim Entertainment, however, didn't do anything to stand out from the competition in the same way. ECW Hardcore Revolution was heavily blasted for being a near enough carbon copy of Acclaim's previous title, WWF Attitude, even down to duplicate movesets. For example, Danny Doring's finisher, the eloquently named Wham Bam Thank You Ma'am, was basically a double-arm DDT, and aspects unique to ECW, like Rob Van Dam's Van Daminator finisher, which involved a steel chair, weren't in the game either. This reskin on an already aging engine somehow made things way worse, with choppier frame rates and laughably low-quality background detail. And just as a further dropkick to the face, a sequel was released mere months later, which was almost identical. Hooray!
Number 9. Backyard Wrestling 2, There Goes the Neighborhood. It speaks volumes when the first installment of your series literally tells players, "Don't try this at home." They weren't wrong, you probably shouldn't. Despite that, they not only ignored their own advice and made an entire game around dodgy, unregulated backyard wrestling, but then made a sequel, fittingly titled, There Goes the Neighborhood. In fairness, the game sets out to be ridiculous from the start, following the Def Jam formula of rappers, adult film stars, and hammed-up caricatures all slapping each other about in someone's garden. The idea of seeing insane clown posse members like Shaggy 2 Dope, what? Is that right? Getting pummeled by a wrestler named El Drunko in a Who is the Least Employable match sounds oddly satisfying. But rather predictably, very little wrestling is on show, with a few bizarre inclusions like Vampiro doing little to justify the wrestling part of the title. Oh look, a choke slam. Well done, I know that one. While backyard wrestling could stumble into so bad it's kind of good territory with the silly characters and hilariously weird news segments in the career mode, it's clear to see why these garden scraps are so thoroughly discouraged.
Number 8. WWE 2K18 Switch port. Since the release of the Switch, Nintendo has been steadily winning over the crowd with its ever-growing library of impressive ports. Every Doom, Skyrim, and Witcher announcement brings out JR-style what the hell levels of disbelief. But there's one particular mess that was so hopelessly unplayable on this pseudo-handheld, it makes us want to renounce wrestling, video games, technology, and society as a whole and move to a cabin in the woods for a simpler life, before inevitably getting mauled by a bear or a particularly large squirrel. WWE 2K18 was, by all rights, an excellent title on other platforms, but the Switch version is notorious for being one of the worst ports of all time. Not only were the visuals and textures pared back significantly, leading to some haunting PS1-era wrestler likenesses, but the frame rates were also choppy with horrendous slowdown throughout. Entrances were played in slow-motion slideshow vision, and if you fancied any ambitious six-man matchups, make sure you've got your entire weekend cleared, because you'll feel yourself physically aging as the game chugs along. We couldn't place this too high up, seeing as it's only one version, but that version will leave permanent psychological scars on anyone who dropped actual money on this release.
Number 7. Fire Pro Wrestling. You know what's a genius idea for a game based on wrestling? You know, the thing that lives and dies on its interesting, crazy or relatable characters? Ditching those famous characters for the sake of an underused console gimmick. The 2012 Xbox 360 release Fire Pro Wrestling featured Xbox avatars in place of any recognizable names, which meant the only person you could play as was celebrated superstar, you. Finally, a chance to debut such potent signature moves as the button mash, the abject disappointment, and lethal finisher, the trade in the disc at your local game store. While the creator wrestler feature has been a staple in wrestling games for decades, there's a vast difference between a purpose-built creator allowing you to challenge the best in sports entertainment and whatever the hell this is. The Sims wrestling? Maybe? Even your opponents are bog-standard avatars devoid of any personality. The saddest part is, though, that this release went against a long-running series of Fire Pro Wrestling titles famous for highlighting the more specialist pro wrestling circuits like New Japan, Dragon Gate, and Ring of Honor. What a waste.
Number 6, WCW Backstage Assault. Strangely enough, when you take away a vital component of wrestling like, maybe the ring itself, you tend to end up with a gimmick worse than the gobbledygooker. The launch of WCW Backstage Assault in 2000 was the last gasp from the one-time biggest rival to the then WWF, who were bought out just 3 months afterwards. And unfortunately, the game was a sad reflection of this. It didn't even let you play in the ring, instead going all in on the backstage aspects from its predecessor, WCW Mayhem, to try and replicate the brutal hardcore brawls that were popular at the time. But the result was a bland selection of behind-the-scenes environments, and only one level was available from the start. So you were stuck running impossibly fast around the truck arena, sparsely littered with items from the wrestling-approved nasty weapons list. Frame rates would tank frequently, camera angles were hopelessly erratic, and animations looked about as graceful as a Great Khali ballet routine. This depressing farewell to WCW left a very sour aftertaste, especially after the popular WCW NWO World Tour and Revenge titles from THQ.
Number 5, World Wrestling Championship. No noise, nothing. All of a sudden you hear the noise of a motorbike and the bike speeds up to the ring. Another wrestler jumps off and attacks his opponent. The crowd goes wild. The referee tries to separate them in vain and needs help to get the job done. Ellipsis. This is going to be one dirty wrestling match, ellipsis. Have you got what it takes to battle it out with the pro wrestlers capitalized of the WWC? This was the actual blurb on the back of the 2006 PS2 classic World Wrestling Championship. No further comment.
Number 4, WWF Betrayal. Like Backyard Wrestling, the name says it all, because this 2001 Game Boy Color title betrayed the very idea of a wrestling game.
No, this isn't wrestling!
WWF Betrayal was a glorified Double Dragon side-scroller beat-em-up, picking from a staggering roster of 4 characters: The Rock, Triple H, Steve Austin, or The Undertaker. The plot is even more nonsensical than some of the Attitude Era storylines, with the other 3 characters inexplicably teaming up to ruin your match before running off to kidnap Stephanie McMahon. But not before some prime smack talk is laid down, however, such as there's nothing like... long pause, wait for it, whooping on The Rock. Before we move on, another not actually a wrestling game culprit worth mentioning is the infamous WWF In Your House, which threw away any notion of grappling in favor of Mortal Kombat style fights where the wrestlers' gimmicks would manifest themselves into physical attacks. We're talking The Undertaker literally burying his opponent and Goldust turning his unfortunate victim into a golden statue. Savage. At least they kept a small level of pretense, with fights occurring in a ring, of sorts. Betrayal, on the other hand, was simply a dreadful brawler with a few reskins and some low bitrate MIDI versions of the wrestlers' entrance themes.
Number 3, The Simpsons Wrestling. This felt like a personal attack on our childhood. Whoever commissioned this shocking portrayal of a classic franchise should be thrown into a ring packed with tables and a couple of angry-looking Dudleys, then forced into watching an hour-long promo from the Sweat King, Shane O'Mac. Unlike a couple of entries, this one did at least include a ring, kind of important in a game based around the damn thing, but everything else in this weird crossover felt like a bastardization of both wrestling and The Simpsons. It all looked so promising on paper, too. The characters lend themselves nicely to some ridiculous gimmicks, with Groundskeeper Willie's ECW-style rake weapon, Stone Cold Barney Gumbel's beer-swigging antics, Giant Alien Kang, or Kodos, whoever it is, pushing the boundaries of surreal storylines, and, of course, Bumblebee Man, playing the role he was born for. But seeing it in action, with each match devolving into a button mash-off with only a few select moves and wildly unpredictable controls, hope slowly starts to fade away. Yeah, it looks goofy and fun from the outside, but as one of the first 3D Simpsons games on home console, this shameless cash-in could have jeopardized the making of The Simpsons Hit and Run, and for that, we can't quite forgive it.
Number 2, 5-Star Wrestling. Finally, a hyper-realistic game where you can play as all of your favourite wrestling superstars like Raging Andy Organ, Greg Harty, and Curtis Angel. Unfortunately, these tiny market store knockoffs are only the tip of the copyright-infringing iceberg when it comes to the 5-Star Wrestling video game. Entrance music, taunts, finishes, even tiny details like tattoos and costumes are eerily similar to their real-life counterparts. Come on, man, Johnny the Bull Maivia, you're not fooling anyone with that every man's elbow. Sure, this game was quite literally created by a company called Serious Parody, but this title should be locked up for crimes against humanity, let alone the numerous copyright breaches. The gameplay itself was, in a word, crap. Just as bland and as ugly as the names on show. In fact, everything about this experience feels like a Twilight Zone version of the real thing. The crowd roars with every move, yet there's literally no spectators present. While the hit sound effects are ripped straight from a Looney Tunes episode, the graphics aren't immediately offensive until you realise this was a PS3 title released in 2015, the same year as The Witcher 3. Jesus! Sadly, in a realisation that is sure to break your heart, this blatant rip-off of a title is all that remains of the promotion, which ended in 2018 after just 3 years.
And number 1, Hulk Hogan's main event. Looks like the all-American hero has got himself top billing again. The infamous Patient Zero for the infectious airborne virus that is Hulkamania. Hogan has dabbled in everything from TVs and movies to the not quite as infectious what's Pastamania. But this game ranks as one of the worst endorsements that the Hulkster has lent his iconic handlebarred face to. Hulk Hogan's main event utilized Kinect motion controls, which tells us everything we need to know, really. Matches resort to a glorified Just Dance routine, copying whatever instructions are given to perform a crop of underwhelming moves, usually 15 overhead slams in a row. That is, if the poor motion recognition even picks up on it, of course. Thank Christian for the vast roster of playable characters, though, such as we've got nothing on this, I don't know. Not even a few cheeky cameos from the Hulk's TNA links at the time, though we shouldn't be surprised given how he screwed over that promotion with the world's most expensive contract for a few leg drops and power poses. You couldn't even play as the 24-inch Python owner, having to settle for Cheerleader Hulk instead. Everything about this was just terrible, proving that Hogan's ability to sully a once legendary reputation knows no limits.
And that's our list. Some truly garbage grapple fests on show, but by no means an exhaustive list. So let us know your best worst wrestling games in the comments below. Big thanks to our friends at Cultaholic for helping us narrow down these entries. You can find them here for more wrestling goodness. And you can follow TripleJump on Twitter here, and while you're at it, why not support the things you enjoy by having a look at our Patreon. Finally, don't forget to like the video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel. I'm Ben from TripleJump, and thanks for watching.